Homelessness Board onto the panel, because we have experts from the board. Okay. Noreen Dunnels from United Way, who's one of our members, had said we've been talking a lot about chronic homelessness, and she thought it would be a good idea to bring that here and for you to hear sort of from voices from people who are working with folks who are chronically homeless in different capacities. And so that's what today's panel is. Let me just start with which is a very interesting and unusual one. It would not have been one I had made up, but it's the federal concept of chronic homelessness, which means that a person has been literally homeless, which means they've been living in a place that is not meant for human habitation, and that they've been homeless for a year or more, or they've had 4 episodes of homelessness in a 3-year period. And then the third condition is they have to have a disability. And it's a disability that's recognized under ADA standards, like it could be a mental illness, it could be a substance abuse issue, a physical disability, a developmental disability, in that range of issues. So anyway, it's a topic that I think is relevant as we walk down the streets of our community, driving around, and we see people who are really struggling, and they're out there and they need safety. And so I think this group, we have some really wonderful organizers and advocates on this panel, and I'm just going to quickly let them say what their name is and where it is that they work. If you want to just say a little bit about the organization, just a teeny bit, and we'll run through the intros. Erik, you want to start?
Sure. Erik Buhr, Community Supported Shelters. We design and build Conestoga huts, and we run 3 rest stops on Union City property.
I'm Dickens. I work for St. Vincent de Paul in the VetLift program, which does permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless, and also teams with the VA to do grant per diem housing. And I work for the SSVF program, Supportive Services for Veteran Families, that provides money for rapid rehousing and homeless prevention.
I'm Cheryl Stone. I'm the court administrator for the Eugene Municipal Court. The Eugene Municipal Court handles most misdemeanors in this community. And I've done quite a bit of research on access to justice for displaced individuals and in other communities.
And I just want to add, Cheryl contacted us when we were working on the one-night homeless count because she wanted to help count people that were homeless that she was in the courts, and we really appreciated her reaching out to us for that. Thank you. Dana?
I'm Dana Petersen. I work with Sheltercare Shankle program, and we provide residential services as well as mental health and other housing services to individuals.
And my name is Shawn Murphy, and I'm with Laurel Hills Center, and we are a community mental health program that works with individuals who have been diagnosed with this serious mental illness. And part of our mission is to help people ensure that they have safe housing and employment and are able to realize their personal dreams.
And I'm Cindy Leming. I work with the HUD-VASH program with the Veterans Administration. And that program works very closely with the Housing Authority. We have Section 8 vouchers, and we've social workers with that program do the case management for those veterans. Our target is chronically homeless veterans. About 65% of our population has been chronically homeless.
Okay, so you see we have a pretty sharp group here. I want to point to your packet for a second, just highlight a few things. I want to thank Amanda and Lisa who are on our staff, and they put together some pretty interesting data from page 17 to 19, and it shows you the programming that we currently provide. We do know that there are huge gaps in the community. That's very clear to everybody who's sitting here. But we also know that we are doing some work and we're providing some housing to people that are chronically homeless, and we're doing a good job with those folks. And what you'll see in pages 17 through 19 is all the programs that are providing help. And I'll just do such a quick summary so that the panel can talk. I'd say that if you looked at this and you poured through it, you'd see that we have 91 households that are have chronically homeless individuals in it who are in permanent supportive housing, and we have another 62 households that got into rapid rehousing programs or traditional housing programs. So like right now as we speak, there are 153 households that would have been living on the streets who are dealing with a lot of issues that are in programs that are safe and secure for them. So I want to take that for a moment and acknowledge that we're doing some really good work here. And in those pages, when you look through your packets, and names the programs that are helping them and the kind of work that they're doing, and these folks are all involved in that. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, and I'm gonna sit down and let these people talk. Shawn was great. I left for vacation before this, I just got back. But she came up with some questions that she thought would be helpful for the panel, and then I shaved them and changed them a little bit, and but she did all the work, so thank you for that. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna do the question, and then I want you all to jump in and just jump in where you want. I'm not gonna call on each of you and torture you, but we wanna hear from everyone at some point. Those are the rules, okay? So the first question for the panel is, for people who are chronically homeless, what would you identify as the challenges that they face and the strengths that they bring as they move into housing?
That's actually something that I speak a lot to. So we work real closely pre-housing with our veterans, and one of the things is that homelessness, especially chronic homelessness, is a culture, and you have to understand that culture. Part of that culture is a process of barter, where you might trade each other for protection, or you might trade each other for any kind of resources. But when one of those people get into housing, they are still part of that barter system. And one of their ways of paying back is to allow people to come in and shower in their apartment, or come in and have a meal with them, or spend the night. And it becomes a barrier to their housing, because then you get problems with trafficking, and neighbors complain that they've got all these people coming in and out of their apartments. So that's one of the things that we work with really closely with our veterans, is helping them to understand that this is their safe place, that they can make barter trades outside of their home, but that they need to keep their home as their safe place where they have privacy.
Other folks?
I would say, start with strengths, I guess, is that each person has a story that I think is worth hearing, and it may be the story that you don't anticipate or expect, and it's worth hearing for a number of reasons. One, I think that hearing people's stories helps validate them, helps you find solutions maybe to services that they need to be connected to, but it also helps us understand how people initially end up in a place of chronic homelessness, and to really try and prevent that on the front end instead of react to it on the back end. I think that is probably the largest strength that I can think of that they bring. I think that some challenges that they face are connection to entitlements, not just healthcare entitlements, but ID and other types of maybe disability incomes or other types of things. Maybe in places that I volunteered, I've seen vets who somehow moved and then didn't have their benefit check coming to them anymore, and didn't know how or where, or didn't have the means to get to where they needed to go to make that connection again. And there's a man in the community where I live where that was the case, and at a stand-up event he was able to get connected, and now he shops in my local grocery store, which is kind of cool because I get to see him, and he's housed and doing well. So I think a connection to entitlements. But the other big challenge that I see, particularly at court with people that we've tried to help, is readily accessible services. It's difficult for me to call someplace for housing or for any other types of service and say, well, you got to have them here on a Tuesday or Thursday between 3 and 5. And I'm like, you can imagine how hard that is to facilitate, especially if there's mental illness involved. And so I think that's probably a really large challenge that I see.
There's a lot of fear of the unknown too. I've worked with people that have been at the mission for 10 years. That's the life they know. I'm used to living with 200 other people, and now you're asking me to go into a house by myself. Well, I don't know. I don't know that I can adapt. So you really have to work with them to get over this, that it's okay to move forward. This is positive for them, and they don't always see that.
You have to give them encouragement.
I was going to say that for the people that we work with is that they're really knowledgeable about community resources. I thought my staff had a lot of knowledge, but sometimes when people come in, they can tell us exactly. I mean, they know, they have tremendous skill in situation that they're living in, of how to get their needs met, which is, I think, is a huge strength. And also that a lot of people are survivors. They were surviving usually something that happened that contributed to them being homeless. And when they're homeless, things happen to them out there that are pretty traumatic. Where I would say, wow, I don't know if I could do that. And that I see that as their strength. And a lot of people, once you sit and listen to them, they're very forthright about what they see is what they want. And so I think for us and for my staff, part of that is that we've had to grow, because we've always thought, well, everybody wants an apartment, right? I mean, but that's not everybody's dream or where they're at right now. And so, but I think that's a strength that, they'll tell us that's not what I want, that's not where I want to live, or, and that helps to create and work with people to move them forward, because we're not pushing them somewhere they don't want to go. To see some of the challenges, kind of like, what Cindy said, is that sometimes with the transition to permanent housing, the skills that you have when you're homeless and living on the street don't translate. I think what, the property managers will say, being a good neighbor. And so some of those things that, some of those strengths and skills that help you to be safe, and when you become a tenant can become an issue. And I think it's hard, because you develop that support system sometime, and then what we're asking is let that go in order for you to have housing. So I think that can be a challenge for folks. And that also, when you're homeless, it's hard to keep up with your basic needs. So, like before I came here, I just had somebody look at income. And the individuals that we work with on average are $778 a month plus SNAP. And that's when they're housed. When you're homeless, Social Security will cut your income because you're not paying rent. And so that is a challenge to try to save, even if you are ready for housing, to to take care of your basic needs while you're being homeless, and then try to save for rent, deposits, housing, all of those things. So that can be a real challenge.
Daily basis.
We're going to let the panel talk for now. We're going to take questions towards the end. Amanda, could you do a favor? In about 10 minutes before we're supposed to end, we'll have a question and answer period. The clock continues to say 8:25, so I can't. Okay, let's take spinning. They're 8:25 for a long time. What specific issues are?
I'll speak to it.
Oh, okay, Eric. I didn't know.
Yeah, I do. I struggle with the question a little bit because of my own personal beliefs and my lifestyle. I don't really subscribe to housing, even though I understand it's important, and having shelter is important. I haven't lived in a house for 4 years. We live behind our shop in a Conestoga hut, where we build a Conestoga hut. We run our operation there. The idea of pulling people from their community and saying you have to cut these people off now and live in a house, I think there's some unrealistic standards there for people to just say, come be with, in some ways it's saying, come be with us. We're the successful ones. And if you communicate that message, I think it can also damage and add additional trauma onto people. And I really struggle just with the social, that perspective that's not, it's said, but it's not said straightforwardly, that there's something wrong with you, let me help you. I've got it figured out, you don't. But what I've learned is that people, people who live on the streets, they've accomplished quite a bit, the people who are chronically homeless. The fact that they've survived for years and years is a success. But when it's your job to go and get people housed, all you're thinking about is, okay, get this person housed, that means I'm doing my job well, that secures my stability. But I think that can also damage our whole community's sense of stability. And just for the record, our organization provides safe spots for people to be as they're transitioning into housing. We we personally don't really, I do what we call mild case management or just helping people be connected to services, but we're not working on getting people into housing. We kind of let them decide to some degree, you know, what their goals are. And for a lot of people it's housing, for some people it's just staying clean, for some people it's getting a job. But we like to promote their independence and making their own decisions on what their success looks like.
I'd like to piggyback on that, what you said, because sometimes, I think one of the challenges is that we as service providers sometimes think of things as like, what are challenges? Like you can't get an ID or you can't get this. But the reality is, and what I've experienced through when I worked for McKinsey Transitions and now, is that trying to get people into housing is that landlord bias. If you show up somewhere with, you know, somebody who has long hair or wears the wrong clothes or has the wrong look about them, a landlord is going to look at them and maybe they'll say, okay, we'll rent to you because you're working with Dana or you're working with this agency. But then I've had situations where the landlord bias comes into play, where they just start to look at that individual, and that individual is under much more scrutiny than any of the other people that are living in that apartment complex. I've had people like where the guy like waved at the landlord, and the landlord had been inside, and he just saw her through the screen and was like trying to be a good neighbor, and she was like, he was staring inside my house and was very paranoid about this. And that's just where these biases come in, and it kind of like makes it an unpleasant living environment for the person who's being under such scrutiny.
Thank you. Good perspectives and different perspectives. Okay, the next question is, what specific issues are encountered by individuals who are chronically homeless and present with substance abuse or mental health struggles, both when they're homeless and then when they're housed? I kind of talked a little bit about that already, but if people want to add to that.
Well, at the municipal court, we have a mental health court, which is a great avenue to be able to connect people to behavioral health services and primarily medication. I think medication, access to medication, again, readily available access, something that they don't have to travel across town for. They have a bus pass or be able to get a bus pass. And so how do I get there and get medications that I need on a regular basis that may help me even cope better with the situation that I'm in. I think access to those treatments, that I understand the ways that people kind of behavioral health are significant. And so that piece in itself is a challenge, I think.
The access to corporate drugstores like convenience stores that are just selling liquor, they don't discriminate against who they're selling it to. I think those are a problem for people who are on the streets and housed. If it was up to me, we'd take out all the cheap liquor out of every single convenience store out of this community and be gone with it, because it's when it's the cheapest, well, besides methamphetamine, it's the cheapest form of being able to be comfortable in your difficult situation.
They probably take food out of the store,
In some research that I did, we did a survey in another community of services that were needed, but not readily available. And one of those services is also dental care. I don't hear that come up a lot in the conversation of homelessness, but if you've ever had an abscess tooth, somehow it's got to get medicated, right? If it can't be removed. And dental care is often a significant need. That can, even if provided, be an avenue or connection with an individual to try and get them into other types of services.
Yeah, we had a client recently, say to us, or no, it wasn't one of our clients, somebody came into our office and said, well, you can't get a job without teeth, so I'm gonna get some teeth. That was his first step. And we've had four people in just one camp get all their teeth ripped out for dentures.
Yep. When I was working at Living West Roads, we had a youth who was 17 years old that had all his teeth taken out and the dentures put in. It changed his life, so.
Yeah, it really changes your
Even at that
self-image.
age, yep.
It's a complete physical change too, like the people that we've had at Shankle who have been able to get dentures, like they just look, you could look at side-by-side pictures and it's a huge difference. I mean, even just with the way that they kind of present themselves and feel better.
Any other comments on that one?
I think that I also had wanted, like the lack of, like, for some of our folks who come in, they want to get a prescriber, but they're not able to because they, the prescriber that they did have, because while they were homeless, they were constantly having to move around because there wasn't ever a safe place for them to stay. Like they were constantly kind of being rousted up and having to move all of their survival supplies, and it's hard to do, make appointments when you're trying to move the only things that you have that kind of keep you warm and safe and dry. And we've had a lot of problems trying to find a prescriber once somebody has lost a prescriber. And that's one thing that some of our folks have, I think, have identified as challenges.
I think our community has a gap, and that's for those people that have severe and persistent mental health disorders and choose not to take medication. And that's a very difficult population to really be able to get housed. A lot of times landlords are afraid of them, or they've got some stereotypical thoughts about them, and so they refuse to rent to them. We have currently quite a few of our veterans that do not want to be medicated, that might have schizophrenia. And so working with them with their mental health disorder without medication is what the case management is all about.
I would suggest to fill that gap, if they, to create alternatives to the medication. In the Netherlands, they started a program for the mental health care system. There's an alternative called care farms. Has anybody heard of care farms? So you can YouTube it. Care farms, it's 1,000 different farms participate in this program by bringing people with mental health issues and disabilities to work on these farms. I don't know about you guys, I sort of, I could develop a mental illness just being in society all the time. And I mean, how many of you guys here spend time getting away from your jobs and the city life to rejuvenate? I'm sure most of you. And when you're on the streets, you don't have that option. So that compounds mental illness because they can't get away from it all. They're in it all the time. With our camps, we've thought about creating trying to pay for a shuttle. We haven't been able to have the extra spending money, but to bring our campers out to the coast for a day. Just to, we spent our work party yesterday up top of Skinner's Butte, and people were so calm afterwards on the drive back. We did a work party up there, and we got to view the eagle's nest that's up there through a telescoping lens. And people, it perked everybody up. It helps your morale. It's a different experience other than the typical experience of being homeless.
Can I add one thing about it? So the question included about challenges for people who are also homeless. And somebody made a comment earlier about that adjustment to change, and I had thought about that too. I had a son who recently went off to college in September, and there was this moment in the grocery store where I didn't know how much milk to buy or how much cereal to buy anymore, and so there was this adjustment that we went through with this missing body. And that transition from being homeless, I've had friends who have helped people get apartments, and then they also have to help teach them how to buy groceries and help teach them how to maybe use the bus system and help teach them to, what personal belongings they need to purchase for themselves for clothing and what not to purchase and how to manage that money that comes in and make it last the month. That transition even in any type of housing situation, whether it be an apartment or a hut, that's a different way of living. And there needs to be a mentoring process or something that happens there to help people over that.
I think what happens in some of the programs that are presented here is that they have somebody who guides them through that and supports them. And like our permanent supportive housing programs for people that are chronically homeless, they get visits from staff to help them with those issues that people are identifying here. Because it's not easy. You're dealing with whatever your issues are, and you're in a situation that's new and different for you, and it's really challenging.
I think the guy that we worked with, he was lonelier when he got his apartment than he ever was.
Yeah.
Which was stressful for
Right.
him, and actually, you know, for a while kind of he felt worse, and his voices were worse because he was in those four walls and he couldn't get out to, you know, to nature, and the neighbors would be talking, and so it was really discombobulating for him, and we stopped it and had to start over, but
I think it's what Erik is talking about too, and I know at Opportunity Village and some of the other programs that have started up, is that there is a sense of community that's created, and when you lose that, whether it's going into housing or leaving an encampment, it's all different, and the rules are dropped and everything's changed.
And I think especially with mental illness too, because I know, you know, it's when you have we don't call them case managers, but the case manager comes and everybody knows that that's that person that's coming to your house to help you, and there's a lot of stereotypes about people with mental illness, and so you know, that's one of the challenges is that the community doesn't they don't understand that people can recover, and that everything that you see on the news is that's not a typical person who might be struggling with substance use or mental health issues. And so that's really hard. And, you know, some folks are like, don't come to my house because that, you know, that's just the extra of having somebody show up even if they're helpful.
I'm gonna go to another question. How are we doing on time?
You got 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, I have to decide. Okay, guys, what should I do, 3 or 4, what do you think?
That's substance.
Okay, I'm gonna do 3. Okay, in your work, what do you believe are the biggest misconceptions about people who are chronically homeless and the system designed to support them?
I think it's really easy to see the homeless as all bad people. Society doesn't like to look at it as sometimes bad things happen to good people. They're all bad, they're all gonna lie, they're gonna cheat, they're gonna steal. You're gonna put them into housing and they're gonna continue to do this. You know, they look at the agencies as, well, you're just gonna push this person into our housing, we're gonna take them, and then it's gonna be the same, you're just gonna back off and not support us. And not just with the homeless, it happens with people that are low income as well. When they passed the law this summer that all landlords had to take Section 8, we saw at St. Vincent de Paul, a lot of landlords wanted to raise their rents to push Section 8 out. Even harder when it's someone that's been homeless for so long.
Not just to raise rent, but like they could even, I've seen some places, they would raise the rent just a little bit, but then they tag on like some sort of fee, like a $50 fee, $75 fee. Then that way, like they can advertise and say, this is what our rent is, and then this fee bumps it up above the reasonable rate. So that you can't use Section 8 or you can't use like the assistance, like through.
A lot of landlords added on that utility fee, which is $30 to $50 per unit. That has really caused a lot of problems.
Or like security deposit being more than 2 times the amount of rent. I think they bump those up as well.
More focus on the system. I had a veteran, a homeless veteran who didn't succeed in our camp and who wasn't able to get housed. I said, who are you working with? And he gave me a list of 8 people. And so he was completely confused because I've seen it where caseworkers are they don't really know what's going on with the person, but they're all working with the person. So there's not communication, just communication breakdown. The left hand's not talking to the right hand. It's just not clear. And people are passed off to different caseworkers all the time. They get one, and for some reason they switch to another. But if they stuck with the person that they first met, they would have a chance to build a relationship with that person. So there's really the lack of relationship there. And I've seen veterans get really frustrated with that reality that it's so confusing which way to go. And we've had a couple of people brought to our camp, and the caseworker just says, "Oh yeah, just stay here for a couple of weeks. We'll get you housed."
I add that I think one of the challenges is that not everybody perceives or rationalizes the same way. So when you see somebody that's homeless, or if you're not educated about that situation, you may have a certain perception about how readily accessible something is, or what their solution should be, and educating the community a little bit on that component I think would be useful. There's a lot of misperception.
I would say also lack of community empathy. With that, lack of community empathy is a big one. I mean, people still drive by our camp and say, "Get a job," and we've got 3 or 4 people who will step up and say, "I got a job," and "I got 2 jobs." So there's a disconnect there. And really, in my mind, the system should be the entire community, not a handful of people whose job it is to do this, but a caring, compassionate community that will, that's sort of, on that track as a community. But that's not the way it is. It's just people's jobs right now. And there's some people who care, and some people who have these jobs care, but,
I had a close family member who was homeless, and it really should be about helping to remove obstacles. And instead, it becomes so complicated because you've got 8 people to contact, or you have to be in 2 places on the same date and time, and you're going to get in trouble no matter what your choice is, right? But somehow be able to facilitate that, to remove those obstacles and coordinate the care and support around that.
Because you gotta take the bus to do all of those.
Exactly.
things.
And how am I going to get a bus ticket, right? And just because you are not housed in an apartment doesn't mean that you're not going to school, or that you don't have a job or 2 jobs, or all of those things. And how do we help facilitate that to make have people feel successful and have the community know they're contributing?
I think for us, one of our biggest barriers is the lack of landlords that will take a veteran or someone that's got a pretty extensive legal history. They might, obviously if they're chronic, they don't have a background for rental history, and they might not have anybody that would vouch for them or give them a reference. So all of those pieces, it's really hard to find a landlord that's compassionate enough and really truly has a heart for this person and give them a chance, because the landlord's thinking, "Oh, it's a bad bet, something bad's going to happen."
I think what I'd like to do now is open it up to questions or comments from the board. Anybody?
Sure. As someone who spent 5 years at the mission and spent some time in mental hospitals and everything, I get what you're saying, but I guess it's a more common question. One of the major obstacles to my recovery was the system, was certainly the mental health system. I'm so grateful that I had Eugene Mission to go to, because there's no mental health system there. And they didn't medicate me and tell me that I was crazy. And so I was able to go to the vet center, and they said, "Oh, let's talk." And I was able to relearn how to communicate with a fellow human being. And so I guess when I was listening, I was a little bit frightened. I was listening to some of the definitions that we need to medicate these people, and we need to kind of go through the diagnoses, because that's what really destroyed me. If anybody here, if somebody looks at you and says, "There's something wrong with you, you're a chronic paranoid schizophrenic, you have to take this drug," which, by the way, will shrink this is true, shrink part of the brain, and may cause you to die 10 years early. And just by that treatment, you get isolated. I'm just saying that there's a problem there, that sometimes you create the problem, or you make the problem worse. When I looked at the mission, I knew, I guess, hundreds if not thousands of men, most of whom were dysfunctional. I would say almost none of them were mentally ill, in the sense that they could function, but they had been traumatized to to pretty much near zero. And they're wonderful people. And so I guess I just want to say, I get what you're saying, I understand the problems, but you can destroy a person by certain kinds of treatment. And it sort of stigmatizes them too. I mean, if someone were listening to this discussion right now, they would say, oh, I haven't seen the problems with the system, the lack of housing. We've got some people that are just kind of weird. And boy, that's not my experience. If the housing were there, if the jobs were there, we wouldn't have so many people wandering around the street.
We actually have quite a few of our veterans that do not want to be medicated, and we work with them with case management around how to manage their symptoms. And it's been very, very helpful, because a lot of people don't realize that there's a recovery process, and not everyone stays in that mental health state. They can recover.
And I think that's the piece that I was saying about the stigma, is that everybody thinks what they see on TV is kind of the big picture. But, you know, that's, you know, people recover.
Yeah.
And that the mental health system can or cannot be a part of that, and can also be a helper and a herder.
Absolutely.
I see
To
this as
that
another
piece,
plug
and
for the care farms.
So, and I think that's the, you know, I think that's what I've learned from the folks that I've worked with, is also that the same thing can go for housing. And so that allowing people to be able to make those decisions is part of their recovery. And so that's what helping my staff to say, not everybody wants us to put them in an apartment. And that's okay, because that's their choice. But let's talk to them about what they do want. And let's make sure that we, you know, that you can work with the community, and the community can work to support people so that they're safe. And that's the most important thing. So I might like living in my house, but if somebody wants to, you know, live in the Conestoga hut, or there's people who camp, that it's not our job is to walk alongside folks as they decide what they want to do, and not for us to push them to go somewhere that they don't want to go, because that is traumatizing.
We talk about HUD Vash as being like on a train around your Christmas tree. You can hop on and hop off anytime you want to, you know, and it's open to the individual. If they want housing, we're there for them. If they don't want housing, maybe they just want to talk. We're there for them too, for that.
I knew a bunch of men at the mission who had a family at the mission. They would never admit it in a million years, but it was their family. And so it's like any direction you're going to go, you're going away from your family. And you're not really going to a warmer place. At least that was my experience. It was a real struggle. So, I'll show you.
Next. Anybody else?
Okay, so, yeah, oh, question here, go ahead. No, I think, you guys provided this list of the places where people are placed. And I guess I'm just wondering, what kind of efforts do you make to create a community in these places? Like in the vet lift buildings, or some of the other facilities, or Shankle, because I think this need and issue of belonging is very important. And we all have many different circles of places where we belong, even when we're going through different transitions in our life.
I'd like to speak to that, because I'm a real believer in maintaining relationships. So one of the things that we've done with our HUD Vash veterans is every Friday from 10 until 12, we have an open door at the Hope Center. And quite a few of our housed HUD Vash vets come to that. A meal is provided, and then we interact with them. We check and see how things are going, or if they have an art table where they can go and do art. There's a lot of community services that are there that have tables if they need to access any kind of resources. And so it's actually a pretty good place to once a week get together with friends.
I know at VetLift we do monthly group meetings for everybody that's in the housing. You know, we used to do extra activities, go to the coast, to the zoo. We have a summer barbecue. Unfortunately, there's just no funding for that anymore. We would like to do more, but for now it's just that once a month thing.
I think we have a great, our staff, my staff is really dedicated to like trying to do out. I think they have outings at least twice a month, maybe 3 times a month. And then always trying to create new outings for everyone and talking. And most of those outing ideas come from our residents, and we have a 16-bed facility where everybody there's like 2 people or so to a room, and we have 11 off-site apartments, and the apartment folks will come into our residential site and to hang out and socialize. Some of them having been former residents of the residential site. We do try to do a lot of outings. Sometimes it's just in stuff, like we'll hit Redbox and get a movie. And right now there's a pretty fierce tournament going on with the pool table. So red versus blue.
Because most of our people that we serve, they live in their own apartments throughout the community, and not in housing owned by Laurel Hill Center. For those who have a consumer-run drop-in center that's open from Monday to Friday from 10 to 4, where they can come and take a class or hang out with their friends. And for those who prefer to move away from mental health services and supports, we talk to them about what it is that they're interested in doing or joining in the community, and then we help them get connected with that, including a staff person or another consumer who will go with them to that place to make that connection. So some folks like to go to Tamarack, which I can understand, I love that pool. And go swimming. We also have employment, and so people who want to go to work can access our employment program, and so that's connecting people with community employers, and so they don't work for mental health or those kind of pieces, but they're connected with employers in the community to get jobs. And so it's really person-centered, and they decide what they would like to connect to and make as their social network, and then we help them to make those connections.
So we don't provide standard housing, but we do weekly work parties with the CAMs, and part of the purpose behind that is to not only develop community within the group, it's also to develop a broader, because you're in the community and you're working for the community, and then the community perceives and experiences those people on the work party, and instead of somebody riding by, maybe having on a bike and having a disgruntled look about a person, they're saying thank you. So it kind of flips their experience a little bit from one that's negative to one that's positive, and I see that as really important. Like I was saying about the thing on Skinner's View, a guy was just there taking pictures of the eagles, and he let everybody, and so it was a lot of mingling between people from different economic, social classes, and having a good time.
Okay, ready to?
Yeah.
Thank you all very, very much. That was great.